My name is Ava. I was 32 years old when I stood at the front of a wedding aisle and stared at a row of chairs marked family, completely empty. No one from my side walked beside me. No familiar faces filled those seats we had saved so carefully. A few hours earlier, my phone had buzzed with a final message from my mother. One clean sentence, typed neatly, that landed like a bruise: "We'll celebrate later, honey. Your brother's Hawaii trip is already booked." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't confusion. She had genuinely chosen a beach vacation over my wedding day. My brother had texted the week before, laughing it off as if it were a scheduling hiccup. Vacations couldn't be postponed. Flights were non-refundable. I understood, right? So I stood there in my dress while the music began, forcing myself not to look at the empty chairs, pretending it didn't matter that sand and cocktails had won over witnessing my vows. Later, people tried to soften it for me. They said my family must have had their reasons, as if there were ever a good explanation for a mother missing her daughter's wedding because of a discounted flight. What made it worse was how easily everyone assumed I would do what I always did: absorb the hurt, smile politely, and wait for the vague promise of celebrating later. They were wrong. Because months after that day, when the situation flipped and they suddenly needed me to show up for a major family wedding, I stopped being the endlessly accommodating daughter. I smiled and said no. Not this time. And if choosing a vacation over your child's wedding sounds like the worst part of this story, it isn't. The real lesson came from how far my family went to justify that choice, and what it finally cost them. Before the empty chairs and broken promises, things had started simply. I live in Seattle and work remotely as a marketing manager for a New York-based tech company, juggling video meetings, campaign decks, and an endless stream of Slack messages. I met my husband, Alex, 4 years ago on a dating app. We agreed to coffee at a small neighborhood cafe on a rainy Saturday, both fully prepared to leave after half an hour if it felt awkward. Instead, we talked until the barista stacked chairs on tables and politely told us they were closing. From that moment on, that cafe became the quiet landmark of my adult life. When Alex proposed, he chose that same spot, sliding a ring across the table between half-finished lattes on a gray fall afternoon. It felt obvious that our wedding date should honor that beginning. We picked a fall weekend far enough out for everyone to plan around. We booked a small vineyard about 40 minutes outside Seattle. I sent the deposit with shaking hands and started mailing save-the-dates to coworkers and friends whose calendars were already crowded with school events, product launches, and carefully rationed vacation days. At first, my mom was enthusiastic. She cried during our FaceTime call when I showed her the ring. She said she was proud of me. She asked about colors, flowers, dresses, everything. More than once, she promised she wouldn't miss her only daughter's wedding for anything. My younger brother, Jake, who lives in New York and works in sales, tossed a quick congratulations into the family group chat, along with jokes about the open bar and plans to dominate the dance floor. My dad, retired now, said he'd always wanted to see Seattle and thought the trip could double as a little vacation. For a brief moment, it felt like everyone was aligned. Then, weeks after the deposit was paid and vendors were booked, my mom called with that familiar hesitation in her voice, the tone she uses when she's about to turn her problem into mine. She said she just realized our wedding date overlapped with Jake's annual Hawaii trip. The one he talked about constantly. His reset. His reward for hitting sales targets. She launched into a monologue about how hard he worked. The stress. The late nights. How that trip was the one thing keeping him balanced. At first, I assumed she was just venting, so I acknowledged the bad timing and reminded her we'd booked months earlier. Then she asked, carefully, if Alex and I could move the wedding. Not by a day. Not by adjusting the schedule. She meant choosing an entirely different weekend so Jake wouldn't have to change his flights or pay fees. She followed it with stories I'd heard my whole life, the vacations she skipped, the sacrifices she made, how she always put her children first, and how family should do the same for each other. The message was clear. A good daughter adapts. I explained what changing the date would cost us. Lost deposits. Renegotiated contracts. Guests forced to rearrange travel. She accused me of being inflexible, of overreacting. She said a wedding was just one day, while my brother's mental health mattered long-term. Minutes after we hung up, Jake texted. He described the incredible deal he'd scored through an app, how everything was prepaid, how outrageous the change fees would be. He said he needed this break for his sanity, and that he knew I'd understand, because I always did. When I didn't immediately give in, my mom brought it up again and again. Sometimes gently. Sometimes with an edge sharp enough to cut. She reminded me that as the sister, I should be accommodating. That I was choosing one day over my brother's well-being. That weddings could be moved, but good flight prices couldn't. All the while, I was buried in spreadsheets, guest lists, vendor timelines, budget breakdowns, staring at proof that our lives were already locked around this date. Calmly, repeatedly, I told my mom we weren't changing it. That's when everything shifted. In the family group chat, she started posting vague complaints about people who only think of themselves, and children who forget all the sacrifices their parents made. Jake followed up in his own way, posting an Instagram story about people who act like the world revolves around their little events, paired with a screenshot of his flight confirmation. It wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. That was the moment the pattern snapped into focus so clearly I couldn't unsee it. In my mother's eyes, my wedding was optional. My brother's Hawaii vacation wasn't. The final decision came wrapped in the most casual tone imaginable. A few weeks before the wedding, my phone buzzed with a group text from my mom, "We'll celebrate later, dear. Jake's trip is set. We'll plan something special just for you when things calm down." A few relatives reacted with hearts, clearly not grasping what she was actually saying. I did. There was no question in that message. No room for discussion. No apology. Just a quiet declaration of priorities. My wedding could wait. A discounted beach trip couldn't. I called her immediately. She answered sounding irritated, like I'd interrupted something important. I asked directly if that message meant she, my dad, and Jake weren't coming. She let out a long, theatrical sigh and said, "Ava, you know how expensive it is to change flights. Your brother is exhausted. He needs this. We can do a nice dinner when he gets back, invite a few people. It'll still be meaningful." I told her a dinner wasn't the same as watching her daughter get married. I said this wasn't a birthday you could reschedule whenever it was convenient. She snapped that I was being dramatic, ungrateful, unwilling to see the bigger picture. Family, she said, had to bend for each other. When I asked where that flexibility was for me, there was silence. Then she changed the subject and said she didn't want to argue. Later that night, my dad texted, "I'm sorry, kiddo. I wish the timing worked out. We'll make it up to you." I stared at the message for a long time before replying, "So you're really choosing to sit on a beach with Mom and Jake instead of coming to your only daughter's wedding?" He never responded. I could picture him reading it, feeling the guilt, then setting the phone down because standing up to my mom was harder than disappointing me. As the wedding approached, my social feeds filled with images from Hawaii. Jake posted endless shots of pools, sunsets, and elaborate meals, captioned with phrases about family time and resetting with the people who matter. In one video, my mom appeared in the background, laughing with a drink in her hand, a flower tucked behind her ear. There was no sign anywhere that her daughter was about to walk down the aisle across the ocean. In the family group chat, they chatted about snorkeling, beach weather, and how relaxing everything felt. No one asked about final preparations. No one acknowledged the date. It was as if my wedding had been erased entirely. On the day itself, the vineyard was stunning. Clear sky, crisp air, rows of grapevines framing the ceremony space, perfect for photos that would never include my family. As I walked past the row of chairs marked family on my side, my chest tightened. Only one seat was filled. My Aunt Linda, my mom's older sister, had flown in quietly. She stood as soon as she saw me, wrapped me in a fierce hug, and whispered, "I'm here for you. Not for their nonsense." A couple of nearby cousins slipped into seats behind her, looking unsure but determined. The rest of the chairs stayed empty. Across the aisle, Alex's family filled every spot. His parents flew in from California with siblings, cousins, even elderly relatives who needed help walking but refused to miss it. His mother cried when she saw me, kissed my cheek, and told me she'd always hoped for a daughter like me. The contrast was dizzying. During the ceremony, the emptiness to my left felt like a physical chill. When the officiant asked who was giving me away, Alex's father stepped forward. Not because we'd planned it that way, but because there was no one else. I glanced once at the empty chairs where my parents should have been. In my mind, I saw my mom in a beach chair, my brother raising a drink, my dad looking away from the time. Alex must have noticed the flicker on my face because he squeezed my hands tighter, grounding me. A quiet promise, you're not alone, even if they chose not to be here. Afterward, we took photos, with his family, with my aunt and cousins, with friends who traveled on their own just to support us. When people gently asked where my parents were, I repeated the same vague line, they couldn't make it. The truth felt too heavy to explain. Later that evening, after the toasts, the first dance, and a moment in the bathroom where I almost broke down before fixing my makeup and smiling again, a staff member approached me holding an envelope. "This came in the mail this morning," they said. I recognized my parents' return address immediately. My stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside was a small check and a folded note in my mother's neat handwriting. "We hope you understand priorities when you're older. Love, Mom and Dad." That was all. No apology. No regret. Not even a line saying they wished they had been there. Just a calm reminder that, in my mother's mind, choosing a vacation over my wedding was a wise, grown-up decision, one she fully expected me to admire someday. I stood there in my wedding dress, holding that slip of paper, and felt something quietly break loose inside me. Later that night, I posted a single photo online. It was Alex and me standing with his parents beneath the vineyard's string lights, all of us laughing mid-moment. I captioned it, "Sometimes the family that shows up for you is the one you build yourself." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't mention Hawaii. I didn't explain. Within an hour, Jake commented, "Looks fun." Wish schedules had aligned. As if this had been some unavoidable twist of fate instead of a choice he and my mother had defended again and again. Reading that line, whatever doubt I had left disappeared. I stopped telling myself this was accidental or temporary. It wasn't. It was consistent. And for the first time, I admitted to myself that the version of family my mother believed in didn't really include me the way I had spent my life hoping it would. For our honeymoon, Alex and I flew to an all-inclusive resort in the Caribbean. Endless buffets, frozen drinks appearing the second your glass was empty, pools melting straight into the ocean. As soon as we landed, I put my phone on airplane mode and promised myself one full week without empty chairs, guilt-soaked messages, or wondering what people back home were saying. For a few days, it worked. We slept late, ordered room service just because we could, and drank coffee on the balcony while the sun rose over the water. We went snorkeling, fish swarming around us as the guide tossed bread into the sea. Every so often, Alex would reach for my hand underwater, like he could still feel how tender everything was beneath my smile. At night, listening to the waves, he'd say, "This is our life now. Not theirs." I wanted to believe that distance and a wedding band were enough to create a clean break. A few days in, I turned my phone back on to check work messages. The calm shattered instantly. The family group chat was overflowing. My mom had been furious that some relatives attended my wedding and dared to post photos. She called it a betrayal, accused her own sister of choosing sides, and implied that anyone who supported me was tearing the family apart. Alongside that were screenshots relatives had sent me privately. On Facebook, my mom had written a long, emotional post about how painful it is when children refuse to understand sacrifice, how mothers sometimes make impossible choices that ungrateful kids won't appreciate until they have children of their own. She never used my name, but she didn't need to. Everyone knew. Jake joined in too. He posted a video talking directly to the camera about overlapping life events, protecting mental health, and how some people only care about their own big day. The caption mentioned toxic expectations and being done with blame. The comments told the real story. A few friends backed him up, but then my cousin Mike wrote, "You skipped your sister's wedding for a vacation. There's no way to spin that." An argument followed, Mike refusing to back down while others quietly liked his comment without saying a word. Watching it unfold felt ugly and strangely clarifying. While I was still scrolling, Alex's phone started buzzing. My mom had decided to go through him. She sent long messages about how I'd always been sensitive, how I was blowing things out of proportion, and how she needed his help to make me see reason. She told him he was the man of the house now, that it was his responsibility to push me toward forgiveness, that holding on to hurt would poison our marriage. She reduced everything to a scheduling issue, completely skipping the part where she knowingly chose a beach over her daughter's wedding. In her version, she and Jake were the real victims, people unfairly attacked for taking care of themselves. Alex read the messages and asked me what I wanted him to do. I stared at the screen. Every instinct drilled into me since childhood urged me to explain, soften, smooth things over so my mother wouldn't feel criticized. Instead, I heard myself say I was done explaining. Alex replied once. Calmly. Clearly. He said everyone had been given the date months in advance, that not attending was their decision, and that continuing to argue wouldn't change what had already happened. For our own peace, he wrote, we weren't going to keep revisiting it. My mom pivoted immediately, telling him she was only trying to protect the family, that she didn't want this to tear us apart, and that he'd understand her better once he had kids. Same message. Different target. Around the same time, my dad texted me, I'm sorry things got so heated. I hate seeing the family like this. Maybe we can talk when you're back. It sounded apologetic, but it was empty. No ownership. No acknowledgement. No sign he was willing to stand up to my mother. It was guilt without action. Sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, ocean noise muffled by the glass doors, I realized I wasn't burning with anger. I felt something heavier, deep exhaustion. I had seen this play my whole life. They hurt me, rewrote the story so they were the ones under attack, then turned to me to fix it, to keep the peace. Even on my honeymoon, I was expected to clean up the emotional mess. I muted the family chat. Turned off social notifications. Placed my phone face down. Alex and I went to the pool, and I let the sun and water dull the weight I'd been carrying. That night, sitting on the balcony as the sky shifted from blue to deep purple, it hit me, for the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was questioning why I kept stepping back into the same role they'd given me. The good daughter. The absorber. The one who called neglect love. The idea that I didn't have to keep playing that part forever slipped quietly into my mind, and stayed. A few months after the honeymoon, things went quiet. My mom stopped posting vague messages. The family group chat went quiet after that, and for a while I poured my energy into work, my marriage, and building a life that didn't hinge on whether my mother approved of it. Things felt calmer until I noticed something odd. One afternoon, my mom started liking my old photos on social media. Not recent ones. Pictures from college. Childhood photos of me and Jake. Even a few shots from our engagement shoot she'd completely ignored before. She left gentle comments like, such a sweet memory. My stomach tightened in that way it always used to. Alex glanced at my phone and said calmly, they want something. He was right. About a week later, an ivory envelope appeared in our mailbox with my parents' return address. Inside was a formal wedding invitation, embossed letters announcing Jake's marriage to Sophia at a resort in Florida. It wasn't just a ceremony. It was a whole destination weekend. Welcome dinner. Beach vows. Brunch send-off. At the bottom, in my mother's handwriting, was a note, it would mean so much to the family if you and Alex could be there. No apology. No acknowledgement of my wedding. Just an expectation. Soon after, my phone rang. It was my mom. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. Her voice was overly cheerful, like she was reading from a script. She talked about how excited she was for Jake, how wonderful Sophia was, how this could be a fresh start. She kept using phrases like healing and moving forward and said more than once that she didn't want to dwell on the past. When I asked if she meant skipping my wedding, she paused briefly, then said, "We all made mistakes, but this is bigger than one day." She repeated the same line over and over, family has to show up for each other. As if she hadn't proven the opposite. After that call, Jake texted me like nothing serious had ever happened. He said he hoped Alex and I would come, that it was time to move on, that he didn't want tension between us. He framed it like a small disagreement instead of a deliberate choice to miss my vows. He even said it would mean a lot to have his only sister there. For a moment, the old version of me stirred. The one who always questioned herself. The one who wondered if she was being too sensitive. Then I remembered standing in my dress beside those empty chairs. I remembered the check with the note about priorities. I remembered watching my family sip cocktails in Hawaii while I got married without them. When my mom called again, the pressure increased. She said my hesitation was stressing everyone out. That my absence would embarrass the family. That people would ask uncomfortable questions, and it would be my fault. She said this was my chance to prove I cared about family more than grudges. Something inside me went completely still. I told her calmly that I wouldn't be attending. She exploded. Accused me of punishing them. Of hurting my brother on purpose. I let her talk, then said evenly that the last family wedding had been treated as optional. That I'd been told we'd celebrate later, and we never did. Now they wanted me to rearrange my life for his big day. I said no. Not this time. My schedule couldn't wait. There was a long silence. Then she snapped that I was childish and spiteful, that this was exactly why she couldn't reason with me. Jake texted again, angrier now, calling me petty and telling me to grow up. I didn't argue. I just replied that I hoped his wedding was everything he wanted and that we wouldn't be there. After that, Alex suggested we do something for ourselves that weekend, not out of revenge, but to reclaim the time. We booked a ski trip to Colorado for the exact dates of Jake's wedding. Used a travel app, found a decent deal, and moved on. When a few relatives asked if we were going to Florida, I answered honestly. No, we were going skiing. Some looked surprised. A few nodded like they understood more than they said. As the date approached, my mom complained in the family chat about how I was choosing a vacation over my brother's wedding, completely missing the irony. Jake posted about walking down the aisle without his sister, framing it like abandonment. This time, I didn't correct anyone. I didn't explain. I packed my bag, boarded a plane with my husband, and felt for once, like I was showing up for my own life. On the day of Jake's wedding, Alex and I were halfway up a mountain in Colorado, riding a ski lift under blinding white sunlight. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't rush to check it. Later, warming our hands around mugs of hot chocolate, I glanced at the notifications. Photos flooded in. Beach arches. Coordinated outfits. Smiles perfectly arranged. In one group photo, there was a noticeable gap beside my mom. A cousin messaged me privately, "They're telling people you couldn't come because of work." But everyone remembers Hawaii. I put my phone away. I didn't feel angry, just distant. Like I was watching people I used to know. Over the following months, bits of truth drifted back to me through relatives who still spoke to both sides. The weekend hadn't been as perfect as it looked online. Jake and Sophia argued about money. They'd stretched themselves thin to impress guests, booking a resort they couldn't afford, adding upgrades for appearances. Most of it, apparently, had gone on credit cards and loans my parents helped co-sign. Not long after the wedding, those arguments didn't stop. They just changed topics, and grew louder. Jake never really changed. He stayed fixated on travel, always planning the next getaway, the next guy's trip, the next expensive purchase. Sophia, on the other hand, wanted something different. She talked about paying off debt, saving for a home, maybe having kids once life felt stable. Instead, she watched her new husband work himself into exhaustion, then come home bitter, complaining that everyone demanded too much from him. At work, things started slipping. The boss who once praised his drive began calling him out for missed goals and a bad attitude. A cousin later mentioned that Jake had quietly taken extra days off right after the wedding to stretch yet another vacation, and it hadn't gone unnoticed. Within a year, everything unraveled. The marriage, already strained by money and resentment, ended in a tense separation. Sophia moved out and didn't mince words. She wanted a partner, not a grown man who expected his mother to rescue him from every consequence. Not long after, Jake lost his job. Officially, it was due to performance, but everyone knew his reputation for unreliability and self-indulgence played a role. With wedding debt, lingering credit card balances from years of travel, and no steady income, he moved back in with my parents. My mom framed it as a temporary reset, telling relatives he just needed time, that the job market was brutal, that people didn't understand the pressure he was under. But people remembered. They remembered Hawaii. They remembered Florida. They remembered how she defended every selfish decision and painted every fallout as injustice. Gradually, extended family gatherings stopped including her. Group chats fractured into smaller ones where she wasn't invited. When she posted online about loyalty and betrayal, the comments were mostly empty. My life, meanwhile, moved in the opposite direction. Work picked up momentum. A campaign I led exceeded expectations, and my boss recommended me for a promotion. At home, Alex and I began talking seriously about starting a family. For the first time, I thought carefully about what kind of environment I wanted my child to grow up in, and the image of my mother and Jake trapped in that cycle of entitlement and denial didn't belong in it. When I found out I was pregnant, I told Alex first. Then close friends. Then the relatives who had stood by me. I didn't tell my parents. It wasn't impulsive. It came from months of watching how they reacted whenever life didn't center on them. Every time I let them back in without limits, I paid for it. This time, I chose to protect something precious. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. It felt like I was finally learning the lesson they'd been teaching me all along, just not the one they intended. When our daughter, Lily, was born, the room felt full even without my side of the family there. Alex cried harder than she did. I laughed and cried with him, and a deep calm settled over me. We shared photos with the people who had actually shown up for us, the friends who traveled for our wedding, the relatives who defended me when my mom and Jake tried to rewrite history. I didn't send anything to my parents. I knew my mother would find a way to make that moment about herself, to turn Lily into another lever of guilt. So I made a quiet decision. No announcement. No confrontation. I blocked my mom and Jake on every platform. No group chats. No vague posts about loyalty. No late-night messages demanding I fix what they broke. I kept my number but stopped responding. A few things still slipped through. My dad emailed after hearing through relatives that I'd had a baby. He said he was happy for me, that he hoped to meet his granddaughter someday, and that maybe we could put the past behind us. There was no acknowledgement of my wedding. No ownership of the choices he'd enabled. I replied once, thanked him, and said that if he wanted a real relationship with me or Lily, it would have to start with honesty about what happened. He never responded. Through my Aunt Linda and cousin Mike, I heard that things at my parents' house were bleak. Jake bounced between short-term jobs, blaming everyone but himself. The debt lingered. My mom complained that I was using Lily as punishment, that she didn't understand how a daughter could shut out her own mother. But fewer people were listening. Many relatives now had children of their own. They saw the pattern and quietly decided they didn't want it near their families. As that world grew smaller, mine became beautifully focused. Early morning feedings. Late-night emails while Lily slept on my chest. Weekend walks around Seattle with a stroller and coffee. I joined a local mom group, started hiking again, and began writing short posts about boundaries and breaking unhealthy family cycles. Sometimes I'd look at Lily and think, if I let my mother into her life exactly as she is, my daughter will learn that guilt and manipulation are normal. That love means tolerating harm. I refused to pass that down, so I stayed firm. No dramatic blow-ups. No speeches. Just a steady no. They chose vacations over my wedding. They chose appearances over accountability. I chose my child, my marriage, and my peace. As the noise from their side faded, the weight I'd carried for years began to lift. I stopped bracing for the next message. The people who mattered showed up and loved us without conditions. One afternoon, while Lily napped and Alex worked nearby, it hit me, I was no longer the girl begging to be seen. I was an adult who had stepped out of a role that never belonged to me. People say family is everything. What they don't say is that sometimes protecting yourself and your children means stepping back from people who share your last name. If someone can skip your wedding for a trip and later demand access to your life on their terms, you're allowed to say no. Setting boundaries doesn't destroy a family. Sometimes, it's the only thing that saves you. And if you've ever been told to accept less than basic respect just because of blood, hear this: you are allowed to choose yourself.